Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro. We're comparing stateless versus stateful. Very important concept we need to know in Kubernetes, but also just when building applications, when we're running them in more than a single virtual machine or compute, because we might want to have a version of our application in multiple data centers across multiple regions. And so how do you handle that when a user goes to the website but then it goes to another server? How does it know it's the same person, or does that matter? So we're talking about stateless. The idea here is that every request, so like a web request to the server, does not care. It forgets about the previous or current state. That's what we mean by stateless. So think of a goldfish that has poor memory. Then the idea with stateful is every request relies on state data to remember. So a good example would be a database. A database, you have to know who it is every time. Like if you were to have 10 requests in a row accessing data, it has to go to the same database, the same place, so that we know who it is. So think of an elephant, okay? So for web applications, it's not that they don't have a state, it's just that the state is stored outside the context of the web app running on the virtual machine. And so that state will be pushed to something like a database or cookies, which are stateful, but the web apps themselves are stateless. So those HTTP requests come to those servers. The server does not know if it's from the same person this time around or other. It just does not matter. Now, that's not to say that web apps can't be stateful. They are if they are on a single machine. And so the problem with a lot of people with monoliths is that when they build them, they do store the state on a single machine. They might store it in memory. And that's where we run into problems, because then it makes it really hard to scale out to multiple machines. So that's a pattern that we generally want to break so that we can move into a microservice architecture, or at least an architecture where we can run our monolith on more than one machine. So when we're talking about stateful, imagine you have a database. So you have a primary database, and then you have a second version of your database, but it's only for read replicas. The state here has to remember who can do writes and reads and who can do reads, right? Because in the primary database, you can always do writes, but the read replicate can only do reads. And so it has to remember that state data. So hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, the way it ties to Kubernetes is stateless is where we will use replica sets. That's where you would launch your applications with. And stateful sets is where you would use things for like a database if you wanted to run it in cluster, okay?